When thinking of Superman's origin, a few scenes probably spring to mind. Krypton's destruction, a rocket crash in Kansas, a boy discovering he's not like the other kids. It's been retold so many times that you'd think there's nothing left to say. But Superman the Animated Series found a way to make it fresh and, in my opinion, definitive. And it's still arguably the best Superman origin story ever told. In just 3 episodes, The Last Son of Krypton gives us what might be the perfect Superman origin story. Not because it reinvents the wheel, although they do make some pretty significant changes, but because they tell a story that perfectly encapsulates exactly who Superman is, what he believes in, and fleshes out the world around him. The key reason why this origin story works so well is because it's very thorough. With all 3 episodes combined, we have just about 1 hour of storytelling, and they manage to cram so much in without ever feeling rushed. The first thing I want to call out as exceptional is their initial focus on Krypton, and the life Kal-El has no real memory of. It was a very bold choice to dedicate the entire first episode to a bunch of supporting characters that were killed off at the end of the episode, except for one of them. Before Superman the Animated Series, Superman's origin was generally told very quickly. For instance, in his first appearance, everything you needed to know, he's a refugee from a doomed planet raised on Earth who could perform impossible feats, was contained on the first page. Similarly, his first on-screen origin in the Fleischer Brothers Superman shorts spent about a minute delivering an exposition-heavy voiceover explaining who Superman was, where he came from, and what he could do. It was very direct and very clear, but not all that engaging. Other origin stories have shown Krypton for a few minutes or a handful of pages, but it was almost always something that the writers wanted to get past as quickly as possible. But Estas dedicates the entire first episode of the series to showing us Krypton and the tragedy of the destruction of their planet. I'm strongly of the opinion that you can't really tell what Superman lost when his home planet was destroyed if you only use Krypton as a setting for exposition. This is not a mistake they make in The Last Son of Krypton. The show sets the tone by fully immersing us in Krypton and its culture. It's not just a backdrop for an explosion. It's a civilization with its own politics, architecture, and culture. The aesthetic is retro-futuristic and is reminiscent of the old sci-fi pulp films of yesteryear, much in the same way that Batman the Animated Series recalled the old gangster movies of the 1940s. We spend meaningful time with Jor-El. He's not just a tragic scientist shouting into the void. He's resourceful, noble, even a bit of an action hero. The show gives him room to fight for his planet, to make hard choices, and to launch his son into space as an act of hope, not sorrow. The real tragedy of this story is that while Krypton was doomed, its culture could have been saved, if not for their reliance on the deceptive artificial intelligence that ran the planet. Brainiac. This was a genius move as it gave Superman a direct personal connection to Brainiac, a Superman villain who, until this point, had just been some green weirdo that flew around in space collecting cities in bottles whilst wearing impossibly short shorts. Now, Brainiac was directly responsible for the extinction of Superman's people because of its inaction. This Brainiac is a selfish AI that damns an entire civilization out of a desire to preserve itself, and its purpose of cataloguing data results in one of the worst villains in the universe on a genocidal quest for hoarding knowledge. But that would come later. Jor-El shows the Science Council of Krypton the findings of his research into the seismic activity that has been rocking the planet, and he has reached an inescapable conclusion. Their planet is doomed, and if they don't act immediately, then they will all die. But Brainiac tells the Council that Jor-El is mistaken. Brainiac instead plotted to save itself, and when confronted by Jor-El argues that the best way to preserve all of Krypton is to save itself, the repository of all Kryptonian knowledge, completely ignoring the fact that the people are the culture, not the data. I talked about Estas's version of Brainiac in a separate video about him, so go check that out if you want to hear more. As always, I've included a link to the video in the description of this video and the info button in the top right corner. What I really like about this story is that sending baby Kal-El into space on his own in a rocket was actually Jor-El's last resort, the plan he made in case everything else failed. He originally wanted to send all Kryptonians into the Phantom Zone, an extra-dimensional prison where they would be preserved, while he sought out a new homeworld for them all. It's a sensible plan, and easily the best way to save people on short notice. But the Phantom Zone was a nightmare realm for Krypton's worst criminals. No one wanted to put themselves through that, just on the off chance that Jor-El might be right about Krypton's fate. After an arrest warrant was issued for Jor-El following his explosive confrontation with Brainiac, the Elves accepted their fate, and their only priority was to ensure that Kal-El escaped and was given a chance at survival. Once the ship launched, Jor-El and Lara embraced, knowing they've done all they could for their son. All these characters that we started to get to know, Superman's parents Jor-El and Lara, his grandfather Solvan, even Krypto, all gone, reduced to dust. But this is all part of the legend of Superman, and really, this is the first time these characters were properly fleshed out. As far as I'm concerned, the first episode is the real highlight of the story. It provides us with proper context and helps us understand just what Superman had lost when Krypton was destroyed. It demonstrates the power of hope in the face of hopelessness, which I think is fundamental in the story of Superman. Now, that's not to say that the rest of the story is insignificant. The second episode slows things down a bit as we see parts of Superman's childhood. How the loving Kents came to find him and when he first discovered his powers, before moving on to his arrival in Metropolis. It was a wise decision not to linger too long on Clark's upbringing, and a bold decision for Superman to not appear in costume until the closing moments of the second episode. We see Clark struggling with his powers initially, saving a little girl from a fiery car wreck, bending an iron rod with his bare hands and melting things with his eyes. The revelation that he is an alien was initially hard for him to handle. Teenagers can have a hard enough time feeling like they belong without being from another planet. But it's when Clark soars through the air looking down on Smallville that he truly gets some perspective. These powers are a gift and give his life purpose. He doesn't have to stay in his hometown doing what everyone else does. He is destined for more. He's not forced into heroism. He chooses it. That choice is essential. He could hide, live a quiet life and stay safe, but instead he steps forward. He puts on the suit, and he enters the world not as a god, but as a public servant. I think it's very important that we don't actually see Superman doing his good deeds in Metropolis during this early period, but see the end result, such as the little girl who fell from her apartment window that he had rescued. This is where the Daily Planet enters the picture. Lois Lane is introduced as a sharp, funny, and relentlessly driven person. She's the one to christen him as Superman. Jimmy Olsen is excitable and pretty oblivious. Perry White, meanwhile, is gruff but fair. The newsroom is a vibrant living place full of hustle and bustle. This isn't just Superman's supporting cast, it's the people he chooses to surround himself with and the way in which he interacts with the world around him. And then there's the villainous side of the supporting cast. I cannot stress enough how much I love that this story introduces us to 3 recurring Superman villains so smoothly. I'd already spoken at length about Brainiac, but what they did with Lex Luthor is equally as significant. Luthor is easily Superman's most well-known foe, so his appearance is a given. But he's not some cackling supervillain as seen in the Super Friends or the live-action Superman films. He's something worse. A businessman. In his introductory scene we are shown how he makes his money selling weapons, instruments of death like his battlesuit that he claims will revolutionize warfare. The fact that he allows it to be stolen by the Kasnians, well, I say stolen, really it was an unconventional transaction, seeing as they paid him $1 billion and had to make it look like a theft in order to bypass trade restrictions, only to then sit back and expect the government to sign a new multi-billion-dollar contract with him to develop something even more deadly. This tells you all you need to know about Luthor. This Luthor is in many ways similar to Superman. He has the power to change people's lives, but he has no morality. He views himself as the king of Metropolis, a corporate titan, and when Superman shows up, Luthor doesn't see a savior, he sees competition. A threat to his authority, a man he can't control, and Luthor does not trust him. He can't believe that someone would be so selfless because he is so selfish. He thinks that Superman is a con man and he refuses to fall for his tricks. But there are none. This grounds the conflict. It's not just about lasers and fists, it's about ideals. Superman isn't just saving people, he's a direct challenge to the corrupt system. Metropolis may be the bright and futuristic-looking city of tomorrow, but at its heart, it's just as corrupt and vile as Gotham City. It's just better at hiding its ugliness. The third villain we meet is John Corbin, Metallo. While he is just a mere mercenary in this story, he'd go on to be a test subject for one of Luthor's attempts at besting Superman, where he makes his own Man of Steel. In a subsequent episode, Luthor's scientists transfer Corbin's mind into a super-strong robotic body that's powered by kryptonite. And we get a tease of Corbin's fate in the final part of this story, where he becomes the pilot of the battlesuit, essentially the man inside the machine. I really enjoyed that piece of foreshadowing. The fact that Luthor had invented this revolutionary battlesuit, this man-made piece of equipment that was supposed to usher in a new age of warfare, and Superman tore it apart with his bare hands with relative ease, is just the perfect representation of how Superman changes this world. This is all conveyed through subtle dialogue and character moments. When Superman confronts Luthor and refuses to speak, Luthor throws a model of the battlesuit at Superman in frustration, and Superman just crushes it in his hands. Lesser shows would have had the two characters overtly explain their conflict and state their position so that there would be no confusion on the audience's part. But Superman the Animated Series refused to over-explain, and trusted the audience to understand what was being said without words. Over the years, there have been multiple Superman origin stories, but few as emotionally rich and well-paced that set things up for the future. Much like the majority of the DCAU shows, Superman the Animated Series respects the myth without being consumed by it. It makes some significant changes that actually better the narrative. It centers the characters without losing the scale. And in just 3 episodes, it gives us a Superman who we can relate to and aspire to be like. The Last Son of Krypton doesn't just tell the story of where Superman came from. It tells us why he endures. This is Superman not as a god or a Boy Scout or a relic of a simpler time, but as a survivor, a son and a symbol, raised by good people, forged by loss, and fueled by the belief that power means nothing without purpose. In a landscape filled with grim, dark reboots and tortured anti-heroes, this Superman stands tall, not because he has to, but because he chooses to. And sometimes that's all the hope we need. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time, I'll be back on Monday with my final Creature Commandos video, where I'm going to talk about the lovesick man-baby Eric Frankenstein and how he should not be confused with the Frankenstein's monster of DC Comics. And next Friday, it's time to return to the world of Batman the Animated Series to talk about one of the most persistent, obsessive and neurotic villains of the entire series. Yes, he's getting his own video. We're talking about Temple Fugit, the Clock King. Hope to see you then.